Good evening, Alan here with the second class in our subject of presenting the path, discovering Buddhism. This is the third module and the second class on, basically it's the looking at the Lamrim. I hope you're well. Good to be here, and I hope you've managed to have a bit of a look at the readings in this subject. Just a reminder, there's actually no class next week. It's the long weekend, and so we won't have a class. There's also a retreat at Vajrayana Institute, an online retreat, the Nungne retreat, which is an excellent retreat, quite demanding, very, Julia, very worthwhile. 3 days and quite intense. So that's on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday this weekend. I hope you've been lucky enough to have a look at the Dalai Lama's teachings last weekend, which were on Chenrezig with the Chenrezig initiation, all online, which is amazing. It's still available on YouTube, so you can watch it anytime. So there's 2 days of teachings there. It's just fantastic. It was almost like His Holiness was in our own room. It's just like having him there with you. So excellent teachings. So lucky, as he said, he's taking it. He can reach even more people by staying at home and just teaching online. It's we're the beneficiaries of that. So let's maybe just start with a few minutes breathing meditation to calm ourselves, settle down, and just tune into what's happening in our minds. So just get comfortable, sitting on the floor, on the chair, or lying down, whatever. We'll do 5 minutes. Oh, just somehow, oh, thank God. I thought I'd clicked the wrong button and gone off the air, but the picture just went smaller. Okay, so let's do some 5 minutes breathing meditation. Coming into the mind and body. Bringing our awareness inwards. Feeling, just familiarizing ourselves with our body, bringing full awareness into the body. Are we evenly balanced on the surface? Our shoulders relaxed, head relaxed. Eyes either closed or just gently open, gazing ahead. Slightly downcast, feeling the weight of the body gently being drawn into the earth by gravity, letting go, using the out breath to help ourselves let go physically, breathing all the tension of the day out. Tension of the body out, tension of the mind out, the busyness of the mind, letting it all go. Relaxing more deeply with each out breath. Then just giving full attention to the breath and the gentle movement of the body with the breath. Nothing to control. just observing, just watching, mindful of the breath. Just staying with the breath, just being alert for the wandering mind. There will always be thoughts coming and going, but as best we can, we'll stay with the breath. If we move our attention from the breath, we just let go of that distraction. Glad we noticed it. Come back to the breath. Just staying with the breath. A full flow of the in-breath, a full flow of the out-breath. So we'll just hope you got the notes sent out today. I've got a few points there of what we covered last week. Basically, the subject is really an overview of the Lamrim, the Lamrim being the teachings in the form that was first presented by Lama Atisha in the Lamp of the Path to Enlightenment. That was the first version of the Lamrim. It was Lama Atisha that set out these different levels of practice. Sometimes they're called scopes: lower scope, middle scope, advanced, higher scope. And he just put in very simple terms the basic path, stages of the path, graduated path to enlightenment, it's often called, to lead ourselves out of samsara, out of suffering state that all sentient beings find themselves in, and to whatever higher level we're aiming for. Could be the auspicious rebirth, liberation, or full enlightenment. They're the different aims of the different levels of practice. So, and then that example of the three pots. So if we're listening to teachings, it said, don't be like the upturned pot, which is closed to any new ideas. Have an open mind, a flexible mind. Be receptive. Don't just swallow everything that because it's said by somebody who seems to be an authority. It's one of the great attractions of Buddhism, is that we're told constantly to check the teachings against our own wisdom. Is it real? Does it work? Is it from? Is it something that our inner wisdom will be able to accept and handle? So have an open mind. Second one is to not have the pot which is full of holes, which I think could mean that we forget everything, nothing sticks, or it could also mean that we're distracted, we're not really devoting our concentration to the subject, so everything just goes in one ear out the other. Don't be like that. And the other one is the dirty pot, which has got so many preconceptions, plenty of examples in the real world of the dirty pot. You can't actually consider anything new. So they're the things to be wary of when we're listening to teachings. And so also that other idea that we have why do we practice Buddhism? What's the point? That idea that we have these ingredients that can actually be activated to move from unhappy states to happy states to total liberation, the complete path. We have the means to complete the entire path. All the Buddhist teachings are available. We have the seed, which is not the teachings. What's the seed? The seed is the Buddha nature. We have this incredible capacity to become enlightened, which is potentially, we are potential Buddhas, Buddha nature. Not little Buddhas sitting inside waiting to sprout, but just like the seed that has the potential to produce the oak tree, if it's put in the right conditions, put in the soil is the body. We've incarnated in this amazing human body, the human brain, and we've got the water, which is the teachings, the water of Dharma, and we've got sunlight, which is the teacher. The teacher focuses all the Buddhist teachings for us. Often the teacher said to be like a magnifying glass, our guru, or so you can see when you look at an incredible teacher like his songs, the Dalai Lama. It's just the presence of that mind. We can appreciate that. It's like the idea of the magnifying glass, which all the sun of the Buddhist teaching is captivated in the magnifying glass of the teacher, so it can actually come into our hearts and burn away all the ignorance and illuminate our minds, illuminate our ignorance. So those wonderful analogies, the seed, the water, and the sunlight. Then we quickly looked at the life story of the Buddha, history of Buddhism, how actually it's many different versions, even the date of birth of the Buddha is not 100% clear. Different traditions celebrate different days. And also those different traditions, particularly the Mahayana and the Hinayana Theravadan traditions. His Holiness says that there was not any clear division like that over historically. There was quite a lot of mixing of these different lineages and traditions. There are 18 different schools, I think he said, at one stage, all in all different parts of the world: Sri Lanka, Southeast Asia, Japan, China, India, etc., and Tibet. So these different schools basically have their origins a lot in culture. Different climates create different traditions. You see how different Buddhism is now in the West compared to how it was in Tibet. Tibet, basically, the only people practicing day-to-day practicing was the monastics in the monasteries, the monks and the nuns who were ordained, and the everyday people were just out working in the fields and surviving. And so it was this now very different now in the West, with the Westerners who want to study Buddhism, meditate, practice, not necessarily become ordained. Some do. And we can also see that tradition, the Tibetan tradition of leaving the actual practice of Buddhism to the lamas, it's to some extent, you can see it, the fact that the Tibetan teachers giving the teaching, most of them are Westerners, very few Tibetans. So these different traditions, different cultures. So it's, and then the different levels of practice. So this is what we're going to talk more about today, the different levels, and also the three turnings of the wheel of Dharma. So there's sort of an interrelationship between the Lamrim idea of levels of practice, or scopes, and the turning the wheel of Dharma. So basically the best place to read about this is Lama Yeshe's teachings, Turning the Wheel, which is the first, I think it's what's in the readings for this unit. And even though it's quite a short, it's page 4 of the readings, quite a short discourse, which he gave, I think, to, so it might have been somewhere in Northern Europe, it might have been England or Scandinavia, over a weekend, I think it was. So he's really talking about the idea. He also brings some history in about Buddhists becoming enlightened and then eventually spending the rest of his life teaching, 45 years I think it was teaching, but he didn't immediately start teaching after becoming enlightened. Remember that the story where he after escaping the palace, the great life of incredible luxury, joined the ascetics, the people, the sadhus who were depriving themselves and thinking that they could obtain realizations by virtually starving themselves and going under great physical hardship. He stuck that out for a few years and then left them and realized that he needed the body as the vehicle. He needed to sustain his body so that he could sustain his mind, his brain, his mind, and then he had the experience of becoming enlightened under the Bodhi tree. So it took 7 weeks. This is all sort of in Lama Yeshe's account. 7 weeks before, he was just in contemplation for that time. Didn't teach, didn't speak, but just contemplating the incredible profundity of that enlightenment experience, wondering whether it was wise to try and teach it to others. So Lama Yeshe emphasizes how difficult it is to convey spiritual teachings. He said that as an incredibly skilled teacher, probably the most skilled teacher I've ever come across. Luckily, I did meet Lama Yeshe just towards the end of his life, only for a couple of years. And I'm now enjoying reading his biography, which just came out last couple of weeks ago, Big Love. Fantastic. If you can get hold of it, it's a wonderful read. Even if you haven't met Lama Yeshe, it gives you the history of how Tibetans left Tibet, and their story of being in exile in India, and how gradually they met Westerners. It's just an extraordinarily wonderful account. And so Lama Yeshe sort of said, he stresses how the actual teaching part of Buddhism is obviously two-way. The student has to be ready, and the teacher has to have this connection with the student. Remember in the 7 limb prayer, which we usually recite before our teachings, one of the limbs is requesting the teacher to teach. So this is still traditionally an incredibly important part of Tibetan Buddhism, where the student needs to make a request. And Lama Yeshe explains that this it's not just words, but it's the idea of having questions. The student has a need to find out some truth. So he meets the teacher and has some connection with that teacher. So making a request, his mind is actually in a receptive state. It's beginning the opening of being receptive to the teachings. So, and then on the other side, the teachers, remember this, the teacher, if he's a bodhisattva or a Buddha, has omniscience. He can actually see the minds of the student and see what's needed. This is the skill of adjusting the teachings, putting them in a form the student will understand. So this is what the great teachers have the ability to do. They have this skill. And of course, the prime example is the Buddha giving teachings 3 times. There's more than teachings than the 3 turnings of the wheel. But those 3 turnings of the 3 groups of teachings were for different audiences. And that's why they're pitched at a different level. So the turning of the wheel just means that the wheel of teachings, giving teachings at the request of the students. And you can, I think, I think I've given this story before. At the time where there was a group of us doing Vajrasattva retreat in Tushita, they have an annual retreat there. This is in the early 80s, and in those days there were so few students. We had an audience with the Dalai Lama for a couple of hours, and we could ask questions. And so I think our group was probably about 20 people, and we wrote down the questions, and most people asked a question, and His Holiness read out. His Holiness gave perfect answers, of course, but when I asked a question and I thought I got the answer, which was very, very profound and helpful, But then when I went after the class, after the meeting, we talked about our experiences of Sorensen's answers, and it seemed that other people had different answers to what I heard. So the great teachers can actually, the words are so powerful. There's more than just the words. There's some power of realization that the students will hear different things that, according to their needs, they will hear what's necessary for them. The power behind the words, Lama Yeshe calls this. So each listener receives exactly what they need from the enlightened teacher. So, and also there may be no words at all. There's some wonderful stories in Lama Yeshe's biography of great teachers giving very few words, or sometimes no words. There was a story, Zina is the Russian princess, in inverted commas, who was the first Westerner to receive teachings from Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa, from Russia. And she obviously had some karmic connection with Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa, but she didn't really appreciate their knowledge. So in the beginning, she didn't quite respect them. She had the attraction to their teaching, and eventually she became ordained. And Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa thinks she if not become enlightened, but she had a very auspicious passing. And but there were times when she asked for teachings to geshis or gurus who weren't actually Lama Yeshe or Lama Zopa, some of the teachers. So there wasn't that connection with Zina, whereas Lama Zopa and Lama Yeshe were very happy to give teaching to Zina. And of course that was the beginning of their beginning to teach Westerners and their interest in teaching Westerners. So she's a very important person, Zina. So this explains, of course, why we all have different experience of different teachers. Some teacher may have an incredible, profound effect on our minds when we hear them. Others may not be moved. It's just a teaching, nothing special. So this is fine. This is because we've got different minds, different needs, spiritual needs, and so on. So this is why there are different teachers for different minds. So this is really what was going on in the first turning of the wheel. So Buddha, the first formal set of teachings, and I went there just after I'd done the Copan course in early 80s. Landing in Varanasi. It's extremely confusing. They say it's the oldest city in the world. It reminded me in these days. There was, horse and carts. There was dead bodies on the street. There was cows wandering through the railway station. Of course, in the Ganges, there was corpses being burnt and bits of bodies floating down the river. So it was a complete and utter shock to a rather naive Western mind coming almost straight from Australia. So I just couldn't get out of Sarnath quickly enough. Out of Varanasi quickly enough, and I knew that Sarnath was close by, and got a taxi and spent 2 weeks in Sarnath. 2 blissful weeks. Beautiful place. There are a few deer there. I think they've got them in a kind of little zoo, and of course there are people circumambulating. In those days, it was quite a small little town. It was just like a little Indian village. Because I was just at the beginning of a kind of a pilgrimage through India to go to all the holy sites, and I had, I think, probably more than 6 months to travel and do Buddhist things. So, so that's where the first ascetics that the Buddha lived with for several years and eventually left, and they became his disciples. And the main teaching was the Four Noble Truths. So the Four Noble Truths, Lamrim Yeshe says the emphasis is, the aim is to, the audience was said to be at the initial level, otherwise you won't go, of course. No need. So that's to be told, in this case, it's that the extent of the problem. The extent of the problem. So we're actually going to later do this, the meditation, the pain of injuring ourselves, the pain of getting older, body slowly deteriorating, the pain of mental suffering. We feel our ups and downs, grief when we lose loved ones. So these everyday universal sufferings of the human existence is the first type. We'll talk about the different types more later. So the existence of suffering, the first noble truth. This is a quick look at overview. So the first noble truth is just explaining what the problem is, or explaining what our predicament is. The causes of the suffering. The suffering didn't just happen. It's not just a previous life. And our delusions, our misconceptions, our mistakes, mistaken way of thinking. So they're causes. But there are actually ways of treating the causes. Teachings, we have our Buddha nature, etc. So there's a way out, and then the act, and what can we do? What meditation should we do? What teaching should we take? The path, graduated path. So that's the basis of the Four Noble Truths. So as Lamrim Yeshe explains, those first two truths is basically explaining that the source of the problem is in the mind, and particularly grasping, seeing things as more than they are, grasping towards external pleasures, or wanting more money, more this, more that, more pleasure. Or denying them. He actually concluded that. He said that's just as much a mistake, like the ascetics when they're actually giving up and abusing their body and giving up food and so on. So again, so that's the, we'll come back to that when we look more at the initial level of practice. The second two truths are more about how, for once and for all, and also how to become fully enlightened Buddha. Liberation through compassion. That is some compassion teachings in the third and fourth noble truths. So, so just a bit more on page 2, looking at the top of page 2. So in the speaking of the mind as something that's real, so because of this, because the level of the students were not, according to Buddha's perception, not ready to receive the teachings on emptiness. So these are said, because they're based on assumption of things existing, they're said to be interpretive teachings. So there's these two types of teaching, interpretive and definitive. So if the assumption is that the things actually do exist as they appear, which is said to be a mistake, things don't exist as they appear, according to the Buddhist, then we need to interpret that. That needs to be explained. Teachings that actually are definitive are discussing emptiness, talking about how things actually exist, true nature, that there's no inherent existence, no substantial existence in either ourself or the outside world. So this is the first turning of the wheel, basically the Four Noble Truths. Second turning the wheel with Bihar, which is probably definitely the poorest state in India. My experience of Rajgir was a little bit confused because I happened to be there on an incredibly foggy winter, and it was almost impossible to see more than a few meters ahead. I didn't really have a guidebook. I was traveling on my own, and I was trying to find Vulture's Peak. Vulture's Peak, time understood this, so they it was appropriate teaching for those students. So also the compassion teaching, compassion was also taught. So it was all about what to do, what actions need to be taken to progress along the path, whereas the first turning of the wheel more about what negative actions to avoid, what to avoid doing. So this is the second turning of the wheel. Third one was held at a place called Vaishali, which I have never been to, also in Bihar, very poor state. The third turning of the wheel was said to be partly at this little town of Vaishali and also at other places as well. Not as much on the pilgrimage map as Rajgir and Deer Park. But, so the third turning of the wheel was to reconcile these two teachings that were given in the first and second turning of the wheel. So it was basically explaining how through teachings on emptiness in particular. So as the very good quote there, if you happen to have the book by His Holiness called Approaching the Buddhist Path, it's really good on this particular topic, turning first to the 3 levels of practice and etc. And so based very much on conduct, how body, speech, and mind. The second and third turning of the wheels are based on the third, but they're what he calls the Sanskrit conditions. They're the teachings that were in the Sanskrit language, not the Pali language. And this is, he says, we Tibetans believe that or the initial level of practice, which I actually find myself identifying with very strongly. I read about it. So he says these people, it's the fundamental vehicle is another term for the people, students of initial level practice. So this level of practice, the student is looking for a better life in the next life. So there is a need eventually, maybe not at the beginning, to recognize that there are future lives, that the mind continues on after death. So we'll come back to this later. So we don't often start off with that. We might have to spend quite a bit of time reasoning and looking at that. So the beginning level practitioner doesn't really see beyond cyclic existence. They just want to have a better life in the next life, perhaps have a human rebirth or a rebirth in what we call the higher realms, where there's a lot more enjoyment. So the aim is auspicious rebirth, a good death and auspicious rebirth, and a fortunate rebirth, I can call it. So to get there, it's basically looking at our conduct of body, at what we do, what we see, speak, and what we think. So the 10 non-virtues we avoid. So these are listed there: killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, etc. So the first 3 are to do with body: killing, stealing, sexual misconduct. Second, 3 or 4 are words: lying, divisive speech, harsh words, idle talk. And the last 3 are our minds: jealousy, coveting, malice, which is bad thoughts about others, and wrong views. So wrong views is seeing things as they're not, wrong, mistaken views about how things exist. So these are negative actions to be avoided because they will cause only suffering and will cause. So we need to actually think through that, see that they do cause suffering. We can relate it to our lives. Might be able to see sometimes the effect of our actions in our own life or in other people's lives. But remembering that also there's cause and effect, that negative actions lead to negative results, positive actions, positive results. Very much cause and effect and karma is part of this initial level of practice. So the aim is fortunate rebirth, meditation that lead to the motivation. So these are the meditations done at the initial level. Precious human rebirth, we did that last week. Death and impermanence. So we'll do suffering sort of comes under impermanence. And of types of suffering I've got as a separate topic. So these meditations help to progress along the path of the initial practitioner. So we're reminding ourselves that if we act badly, we're going to suffer. And think everything has a consequence. What goes around comes around, put it in very everyday terms. So the practices that help to achieve this, taking refuge, understanding karma, cause and effect, and avoiding the 10 non-virtues. Okay, so this is he actually even has a table that has the different levels on one side, and then he's got what they're aiming at, the next column, what meditations these level practitioners do, and what practices will achieve that, and so on. So it's very good, very interesting. I was thinking of maybe next class I'll try and photocopy it and scan it and attach it to the notes next time for the next class. Okay, so let's I thought I put a whole quote there on page 3 of the notes from His Holiness because it's so good. He's actually teaching directly to Westerners here on Westerners who are practicing at this beginning level. He says that actually if you read the teachings historically, the Lamrim teachings, they were all written for monastics, for monks and nuns in monastery. And he said monks and nuns in monasteries all had an understanding of rebirth and reincarnation. They didn't really need to be taught that. So there was no specific teachings on why they should believe that. So with Westerners, he said this is not an assumption because it comes straight from a Judeo-Christian background, and we probably have never even heard of reincarnation before we get to Buddhism. So both I can think I related this very much to my own experience. Why did I go to India? Why did I want to investigate other religions and some sort of spiritual practices? It was not to because I had no belief in future life. It was, as he said, individuals who would like to experience less stress and anger, better relationships, improved health, more peace of mind in this life. And they look at the Buddhist teaching as a way to that end. So that's true. Certainly for many, probably the first few years of going to teachings, trying to meditate and reading and so on, that's where I was at, a better life. But in the back of my mind, of course, was this idea of reincarnation, which seemed to be future lives seem to be underlying everything. So he says, His Holiness says, to get to the next stage, we diminish our destructive actions and increase our constructive actions. And eventually we accept the plausibility, the possibility of future lives and cyclic existence, that our actions could have effects beyond this life, towards them into the next life. So, so this is getting a bigger picture, expanding the horizons from not just from now until the death of this life. And then the last one, or the last second point. So you think of the topics over and over. We're still on the initial level of practitioner, and you want to create the causes to have a peaceful death and good rebirth. So this is taking into account that there is this possibility of a future life, not just the possibility, but then it becomes actually there is a future life, become more and more certain, and then if there's future life, then you start to grasp the idea of cyclic existence, that there is this constant cycle of birth, aging, sickness, and death, and actually it's not just necessarily a human cycle. The human cycle is one of the best. It's still not a good one, but the best to make a break out of the cycle. But there's animal realms and lower realms. So as your heart opens, more and more the thought of returning waking for the benefit of all beings. So the idea is that as we progress, we see that we're not alone. Others are going through the same suffering and difficulties as we are. And so we start beginning the seeds of equanimity, the seeds of loving kindness, compassion. And this is progressing perhaps onto the next level, the intermediate level and the higher level, those that wish to become fully enlightened, like our teachers, and leave cyclic existence once and for all, and actually be able to lead others out of cyclic existence. So I thought that was an excellent overview by His Holiness. So I put it word for word in there, and I put Wai Chong's good summary there about the initial level. His emphasis is on giving up attachment to this life, which is one of the favourite phrases of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, giving up attachment to this life, and attachment to our own happiness, our own short-term aims, giving up self. So this is sometimes called renunciation, and he stresses that this is not giving up interest in this life, that nothing's worthwhile, giving up our friends and just sort of throwing in the towel. It's not that's wrong, he says, and it's quite true. It's not the way. So what it is giving up this life in your mind. This is one phrase. I think it was Shantadeva's phrase, give up this life in your mind. And there was a monk who was saying that he was doing all these prostrations. He said, that's great, but why don't you practice Dharma? And they said, oh no, well, what should I be doing? So then he started making offering, and the teacher said, that's great, but you should practice Dharma. So then he did a few things, and whatever he did, the teacher said, it'd be better if you practice Dharma. And he said, well, what's that? And he said, give up this life in your mind. So give up this life in your mind. So we're in the world, we're still in life, but we're moving through it without attaching, holding on, grasping, looking for satisfaction in things that can't provide it, impermanent things. Okay, so next week we'll actually go, or not next week, the week after, the third class, the middle level and the high level of practice. But just there's a quick summary there on page 4 by His Holiness. The practitioner at the middle level has actually realised that just having a good rebirth again and again and again is not actually going to solve the problem, because we're still going to be thrown into uncontrolled rebirths we're still in samsaric existence, still going to suffer. So we need to get out completely. We need to be liberated. So this is the wish to become liberated, complete. So we purify all stains of afflictions and all karmic imprints on our minds, so that we actually become free of uncontrolled rebirth. We do this, we practice ethics, concentration and wisdom, the 3 higher trainings. Then the higher level is to become a completely fully enlightened Buddha, with eliminating all karmic imprints and their stains, so that we can actually become completely fully enlightened and lead other beings to Buddhahood, become a Buddha and lead other beings. So so that's the 3 scopes, or the 3 levels of practice. Yangshi Rinpoche says to remember that these are not separate. We actually need to have them all in mind. So he said, if you're developing compassion, you have to have first of understanding of suffering, which of course the first level, first noble truth, and then we can develop, once we understand our own situation, we can develop equanimity and compassion and renunciation and cause and effect. So we need all those nuts and bolts, the first turning of the wheel, to be able to practice at the intermediate and higher levels. So there we are. Just a quick skip through those points on the initial level of practice, or the lower scope. So I've left plenty of time for meditation on the first noble truth, the truth of suffering. So just, well, this is a practice we sometimes do in our drop-in meditation class. Not often, but if it's taught to people who've just dropped in for the first time, they might run away and never come back again. Because it can be confronting to new people to be told that, you know, the life is different. Basically, where our situation is not good, and human level, the human body has got terrific potential, but there are these reasons that we need to move on from this situation, our lot. So this meditation, we start quite a good. I've used different sources. Kathleen MacDonald is, you know, one of them. How to meditate. Great monk called Adrian Feldman, Thupten Gyatso, who's an Australian monk, was a doctor, now head of the Thupten Sherod Ling, the monastery in Atisha, in Bendigo. So a very senior monk. So he's written a book called The Perfect Mirror and talked about different meditations. So he some of his accounts and anecdotes, when he was traveling, before he became ordained, he was traveling, came across a fellow traveler who had built a house for his wife to retire to, to retire to, a very beautiful house in Greece. This man was incredibly wealthy, hugely wealthy and successful. And just as they were ready to move into the house, the wife passed away. And so he's going through unbelievable suffering. So this sort of helped him become interested in the Dharma, Buddhist teaching, because there's people who seem to have everything and then lose everything. It fits in very well the first noble truth that of suffering and impermanence. One of the quotes from Adrian is, "The object and situations we rely upon for happiness are unreliable because they're impermanent. They're unreliable because they don't last. Death and impermanence rule the world." So this is a quote that I think he heard from one of the teachers he took teachings from. So in this meditation, there are three types of suffering, and of course, in the Four Noble Truth, First Noble Truth, in the Four Noble Truth, First Noble Truth, this is what Buddha explained. So the first, they're explained in different words, but the traditional description of the three types are the suffering of suffering, and this is the obviously one where we've got pain in the body and we feel it. Very obvious, doesn't need much explanation. Second one is suffering of change, which is much more subtle. This is said that what we think is pleasure from outside objects, the beautiful partner, the beautiful food, the beautiful house, the dream job, these external things that most people aspire for as the idea of happiness, are actually not able to provide happiness in the long term, only temporary happiness. So there's nothing wrong with them in themselves, but it's the way we grasp at them as if they're going to actually provide lasting happiness. And so this is the second type, and probably the most difficult one to accept for particularly us Westerners. Some of the analogies are like taking a painkiller. It makes us feel better for a little while, but it actually just numbs the toothache or the sore foot or whatever it is. We feel great because we don't have the pain compared to what we had before. But it's not in itself, it's just less painful. From the Buddhist point of view, we're still suffering. And this applies for any sort of happiness that's coming from the outside, the external world, is going to stop. It eventually not provide us with lasting happiness. And I guess the best example is life stories. We just see it in biographies, particularly things like on TV where somebody who's incredibly successful has everything go wrong and has a life change. They don't always turn to Buddhism, but there's usually a massive change if they have everything and then they lose everything. It's a reconfiguration of the way they look at things, and they might end up working for charity or working for others. It's definitely usually a change and a less pursuit of what they were seeking for happiness before. So this is the first in the sun getting too hot, and then moving to the shade and getting too cold. So there's this. We see it in animals. They're always looking for the most perfect condition, and what eventually starts off as being pleasure, eventually turns to suffering. Delicious ice cream, delicious chocolate cake. If we just keep going, if there was inherently pleasure there, if there's something inherently good about it, we get more and more goodness and more pleasure the more we eat. But we know that's not true. We actually turn from pleasure to pain to suffering if we just keep going with the eating or whatever it is that we're doing, looking for that outside hit. So this is the second type of suffering, and we actually in the meditation just rest our mind on some of the experiences we've had on these, where we've what's turned starts off as pleasure turns to suffering. The last one, the most subtle of all, the all-pervasive suffering. But this is the realization that probably the core, it's the third noble truth. The cause, suffering has a cause, and suffering can be ceased. The actual cause is that we're actually subject. We're in cyclic existence. We actually are subject to all our past actions, which is karmic, the karmic effects of our action. So this is going to throw us into the cycle of rebirth, birth, aging, sickness, death, and so on. So it's the idea that we are in a situation where unless we get out of it, we're going to just go round and round. We're on this cycle. So this is we do this later on when we study the Wheel of Life and the 12 links of interdependent origination. How, because karma is so profound, we accept the idea of cause and effect. It's the very small result is, of course, we do something to harm others, we're going to actually be harmed. If we kill, we're going to suffer poor health and shorter life. If we kill intentionally, that's the karmic result. So this is that on a bigger scale, that all the causes of the karmic seeds that we planted in past lives will come to fruition, not necessarily in this life, but also in future lives. If we keep with creating the causes, the negative causes, we're going to experience the effects. So we need to do something to stop the causes, stop the effects. So basically, there's those three types of karma. We end the meditation thinking and come fully enlightened being and lead others out of suffering. So so get a comfortable position, and we'll bring our minds to our calm, meditative state. So we begin our practice on the suffering and its causes, which is the first noble truth. By beginning with the first type of suffering, which is the one we all have familiarity with, suffering of suffering. So we call our experience of physical suffering, any body pain we have or have had, our illnesses, health problems. How we can be completely well today, and tomorrow we'll have some sort of illness. Particularly now with the coronavirus, we can see this type of suffering in very vivid detail all around us, around the world. Just a few months ago there was no corona illness, and now millions are infected, hundreds of thousands have died. Other types of physical suffering are that of war, natural disasters. Think of the suffering experienced by cyclones, tsunamis, terrorism, suffering of poverty, not having enough to eat, not having the necessities of life, shelter, clothing, food. These are all physical sufferings of humanity. In the West, we have probably less of these types of mental suffering, ups and downs, maybe depression, isolation, loneliness, anxiety. Grief when we lose loved ones. The suffering of old age. Even if we are well, our body will eventually age. Body by nature will change, being impermanent. What is our current mental state? Are we experiencing any suffering right now? If we're not, think of others, people we know in our personal circle of friends, relatives, partners. Suffering either physically, sickness, or mentally, suffering loss of loved ones. Anxiety about the future, particularly with our virus, coronavirus. So now we all familiar with the first type of suffering of change, which is the more subtle, one that we usually mistake as pleasure. We can recall our experience of pleasure in this life. The sensual pleasures, enjoying music, good company, good food. Relationship pleasures, sexual pleasures. Ask ourselves honestly, how long do they last? So this is the suffering of change. This third type of suffering, the suffering, all-pervasive suffering. Our situation creates suffering. We're not enlightened beings. Because we're not enlightened beings, we're subject to the effects of what we've done in the past. We've created negative actions of body, speech, and mind. We need to experience them unless we purify it. And these causes, unless we take steps to remove ourselves from this cycle, that we need to free ourselves from disturbing thoughts, negative emotion, and purify past negative actions. But this is the wish. Regenerate, to be free, to be liberated. When we realize the full extent of this type of suffering, or pervasive, generate the wish to escape and become liberated. When we realize that we're not the only ones in this situation, we generate the wish to help others escape and become liberated. Get together, even in cyberspace. Have a wonderful week, a wonderful 2 weeks, because no class next week, and I'll see you Monday after next for our third class. And take care and stay well. Signing off. Bye-bye. Bye.